Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today we have a new guest, Grand Newsham. Yes?
Oh, yes, I'm glad to be here.
And I'm happy that we can continue our interviews with former military people because I think they have a very different insight and point of view than civilians. So, Grant, could you please introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I'm Grant Newsham. I was with the U.S. Marines for a long time, about 30 years total. But I also worked for an American investment bank in Tokyo for a long time, a decade or so. Was also worked for a high-tech company in Japan and Korea, Motorola. People used to know what Motorola was. Now it barely exists. Thank you, China. And and was also with the U.S. State Department for about 8, 9 years in Tokyo, but also worked in Southeast Asia, Central South Asia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, that area. So I've done
And now,
a range of yeah.
yes?
Mhm. Oh, so I've seen both the military end of things, the business end, the government end. So I have a few different perspectives. And now what I do,
Yes.
I guess I'm part of the commentariat.
Okay.
I commentate. I write a lot
Okay.
and speak. And
Okay.
I'm with a group called One Korea Network, which aims to help educate on affairs on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay, I would like to start with a topic that's familiar to you and that's familiar to me. Those people, the China apologists, they like to argue that if the West sacrifices Taiwan, then nothing bad would happen. China would be happy. Everybody would be happy. But it's easy to explain it without mentioning that China has many other territorial claims, one of them being the Okinawa Islands. They also have some claims regarding Korea. So could you please elaborate on that? How is it really, who is right here? The apologists or the people who are on the ground and see how the PLA and CCP operate?
Well, I think the other people. If you look at this, you look at if you follow Chinese behavior, just take the last 30 years. You could take the last 50 if you wanted, but just take the last 30 years. And it's like a science experiment. And the hypothesis was that if America and the West and Japan, if they accommodate the PRC, accommodate the Chinese communists, don't complain when they do something wrong, but just give them what they want. Um, um, that the Chinese will gradually liberalize. They will become better behaved. They will be the so-called responsible stakeholder in the global rules-based order. Uh, but it was pretty clear, at least 20, well, 15 years ago at the bare minimum, that China had no interest in changing.
Yes.
It would take the presents, the favors it was given, pocket them, and then just keep doing more of the same. And in fact, it has now built itself up economically, military, to the point it is a huge threat to its neighbors, but also to the global system, to the so-called free nations. And it was, as I say, it was a science experiment that it was obvious the hypothesis was wrong years ago, and yet we kept it. We kept thinking that if we just gave it a little more time, a little more sort of accommodation to the Chinese communists, that they would behave nice, that they would become like a great big Canada. Well, that was never going to happen. It's simply not the nature of a communist regime or a Chinese regime, for that matter. So that's how it looks to me. And the Chinese have said that, well, Taiwan is theirs, that they intend to take it. But it's not just Taiwan. As we know, they have said the entire South China Sea just about belongs to
Yes.
China. The South China Sea is about 1.5 times the size of the Mediterranean Ocean. It has historically been international waters where anybody can use it, but China said it is all ours, and not just the South China Sea. The Chinese have said that Japan's southern islands uh, belong to China. They say the Japanese stole them, took them from them in the 19th century. But it's more than just these small islands, the Senkakus at the southern end of the Japanese archipelago, the Chinese have also said the entire Ryukyu chain that
Yes.
extends all the way up to Kyushu, the big Japan's biggest southern island. Chinese have said that's ours too, and we'll take it when the time is right. Uh, so, one expects the Chinese will also say Antarctica belongs to them, because
Yes.
penguins are black and white, just like the
Like
panda.
panda.
It's so that's really is the situation we face, and it is fortunate that there is empirical evidence to look at to assess Chinese behavior. It's no longer really debatable unless you're on the Chinese payroll or
Yes.
have some other interest in
Now it even looks
accommodating
like
China.
even Hong Kong wasn't a colony. It's been all the time theirs. So yeah, now we have
Well,
this one.
you see how it works,
Yeah, who
and
would expect?
um,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm.
So you're saying that actually that it is true because I've been, countered on social media, people saying, no, it's not true, blah, blah, and it's only maybe the scholars or the former military. But no, it's the journalists, the scholars, it's the lower ranking officials. So it's always somebody who claims it. And the government never distances itself from those claims.
No, you just have to look, and you look at the people who make these statements. They're not all that low level, and also
Yes.
consider the nature of the regime. Is this a regime where somebody could say something that was contrary to government thinking, government wishes, to Xi Jinping's desires, and stay alive or stay free for very long? No, and I would just suggest somebody read the Chinese media for just a week or even a few days, and the English translations will do just fine. And look at it, and it all says the same thing. Everything is aligned with central China's central government policy, with the Communist Party's policy. If it's not, it gets shut down very quickly.
Good. So I would like to quote now three examples. I would like to talk a little bit about Japan's commitment to Taiwan's safety. So we had almost a year ago, Japanese Defense Ministry was planning to deploy missile units on the Shikigaki Island, 300 kilometers off the coast of Taiwan. The second thing is a group of LDP lawmakers intended to sign something like a TRA-like deal with Taiwan. And the third, June last year, the Deputy Minister Yasuhide Nakayama and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, they both called Taiwan a country. And we could go on and on. So how is the commitment from Japan towards Taiwan? Is it just more like verbatim, or is it really some serious substance behind it?
There's some substance, but I would use the expression the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. There has really been a shift in Japanese thinking in the last couple of years and in the last few months, partly owing to Ukraine. And the Japanese now realize that, and I say the Japanese, I mean the Japanese government, Japanese officialdom, and the Japanese public. They all realize that Taiwan is existentially important to Japan. There's an expression you used to hear years ago from the Japanese military, which was Taiwan's defense is Japan's defense. And they understood the importance of Taiwan. But now the government is caught up. And you're now here having people say this clearly. You have Japanese prime ministers say it, prominent officials as well. And the public in Japan has always understood Japan's defense requirements, but only when they are explained to them. And the government rarely does that. But the public is very intelligent on these matters. So you do have a sea change and shift in Japanese thinking to realize Taiwan's importance and the importance of Japan doing more to help defend it. But here's the problem, that while the risk is understood, Japan is really not taking the concrete steps that it needs to do in order to get its military in order, to get it so it can actually operate, fight a war, and alongside the United States, as hard as that is to imagine. They haven't done the necessary things. They've made some steps. As you mentioned, they've put missile batteries on some of the southern islands, such as Ishigaki. They've got listening posts on some other islands, Yonaguni, which is only 50 miles from Taiwan, for example, and they've put some detachments on these islands. But what you find is that Japan's defense of the southern islands is not coordinated. The Army, Navy, and Air Force don't really have a joint plan. They each sort of do what they think is useful. And it's not coordinated very well with the Americans. So you can see the opportunity, but you also see the shortcomings. Um, Prime Minister Kishida has recently said he's going to double defense spending within 5 years, and he's going to fundamentally improve Japan's defenses. But he hasn't said exactly what he's going to do, and that's a sort of a problem. But Japan, if they knew, if they were told what to do, shown what they need to do, i.e., by the Americans, they could come along very quickly. But the reality of Japan's defense capabilities is usually less than people expect. There's a lot of potential, and it could get very good very quickly. But as I say, it's lagging. The Japanese Navy is the exception. They are very good,
Yes.
highly professional. They have good niche capabilities in certain areas, particularly submarine warfare, anti submarine warfare, surveillance. Their surface combatants are pretty good, are very good actually, but they don't have really enough of an air wing. They don't have any air wing really, so they lack air support. They don't coordinate well with the air self defense force, with the Japanese Air Force. And the biggest problem of all is they're too small. It would probably need to double in size to handle its requirements.
Okay, so and since recently, as you said, everything is changing so fast that we had a few years ago already Russian Chinese exercises, and now we see their ships and planes exercising, flying together. How about, do you think it's possible that one day, or is there no commitment, that somehow Taiwanese and Japanese would kind of unite and show their strengths together? I'm not sure those countries, it would be a great move, but I'm not sure they would really have the will to upset China. But they could actually band together the same way. It would be a fantastic move.
I think it will happen if the Americans go first. If the Americans go first and draw in Taiwan, will break Taiwan out of its isolation, military isolation in particular, uh, to the point, as you know, that the Americans and the Taiwanese have not done any joint training that matters for 40 years. And they've not done joint planning. They've had very limited contacts. The Americans need to go first and break that isolation. Then I think the Japanese will come along. But I don't think the Japanese would do it on their own. And going back to what I was talking about earlier, that the Japanese really have very limited contacts at the official level and at the military level with Taiwan. They're extremely limited. And despite uh, really the recognition in recent times of the threat to Taiwan, that Japan still cannot bring itself, for example, to send attaches, defense active duty officers to Taiwan as liaison officers. It's a pretty basic thing, but they just won't do it. And there's no real discussions with the Taiwanese about defense, etc. Or it's well hidden. If it is, I don't think there is much at all from what I hear. But one way this could happen, we could improve things. For example, is if the Americans invite the Taiwanese, say, to Guam to do joint training with the Navy, with the Taiwan Marine Corps, U.S. Navy, U.S. Marines, and why not get uh, the Japanese Army, the Japanese Navy, and Air Force to come and do training for humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. And that would be one good, easy way to do it. It would have operational advantages in terms of improving Taiwan's capabilities. Would force the three countries' militaries to be able to operate together, but it would also have a huge political significance if that was done. It would show that the Americans and the Japanese are not giving China a veto on what we do with Taiwan. So, as I said, the Americans have to go first on all of this. Taking the initiative on things like this is not really Japan's strong point.
I think the Congress decided last year to invite Taiwan to RIMPAC, but the Biden administration didn't. So that was a chance.
Hmm. That's right. The U.S. Congress has been actually calling for this
Yes.
and for joint training since at least 2016. And every year they put it in a bill, the Defense NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. And the language says this is a sense of the Congress that Taiwan should be invited to RIMPAC, that U.S. forces should do joint training with the Taiwanese. And then what happens is the Department of Defense does nothing. The White House, for whatever reason, doesn't do anything. And the State Department makes sure it doesn't happen. And their excuse is, well, the bill is only a sense of the Congress. We're not being ordered to do anything. And it's you can see how the wording
Yes.
allows for this kind of interpretation. And I've actually seen there's a former State Department official recently retired in Taiwan. This was a few years ago. Tell an audience of Taiwanese analysts that almost say, "Well, how could you be so stupid to think we would do anything?" And I was, of course, embarrassed, but kept my mouth shut. But that was the thinking. This was a State Department official says, "Well, we don't have to do anything because it's Congress just saying what they would like to have happen, rather than telling us something must happen." So that's where the situation is, and it is unfortunate, I think, because you have if you don't do it, well, when the time comes for something serious, maybe we will stand
Yeah.
back, or
So
the other
even
side might think that.
so even the Trump administration didn't.
They couldn't get it done. I don't know why, but they certainly understood the issue, and they were far more supportive of Taiwan than previous administrations, and then the current one. And they did allow a large number of arms sales to take place. And they say they were supportive. You did have some visits by U.S. officials to Taiwan that you wouldn't have had before. And the Trump administration was the first administration since Nixon that was actually had the right approach towards China. They realized
Yes.
that the science experiment failed and that the only way to deal with China was to look after US interests, to require reciprocity, to require Taiwan to play by the rules, not to always be begging China, require China to play by the rules, not begging China to please talk to us, so please engage,
Yes.
please let us have a meeting, appearing to be a supplicant. But the Trump administration got it right, but they had some good officials who understood this, like Mike Pompeo, Matt Pottinger, Dave Stilwell, Miles Yu, and some others. They really had a good team that understood China, and they were very effective.
So it unfortunately might take an accident like over the Hainan Island, especially since Chinese forces are constantly either aiming lasers at foreign assets, not only in Asia, also around Djibouti, and they are very aggressively harassing other ships and planes. The question is, why doesn't anyone fight back? Like, there is so much harassment and so much aggression from the Chinese side, and none of the forces does anything, even the Americans. So why is it? Are they so afraid, or is it like some calculus behind it? What's the rationale just to always be so passive?
Um, it's hard to say, but it's probably pretty simple. At the end of the day, we're afraid of getting China mad. I will say the Trump administration was the exception. And you'll see that China kind of backed off during that period, didn't do so much. Uh, but now, before that, they did plenty, and now they're doing plenty again. Uh, but it is a sense on the Chinese side, I would say, that the Americans will not do anything. It's like a bully in a schoolyard. If he smells weakness, if he smells that vulnerability, he's going to take advantage of it. But also on the US side, what you find it's unfortunately the Chinese have co-opted, have bought off a huge part of America's elite class, in the financial class, the business worlds, the political class as well. They have managed to uh, basically turn them into a bunch of quislings, uh, who unfortunately see accommodating China as the way to go. They see America as the problem. Some of it is financially motivated. Some of it is reputational, that you have people who've been promising China is a friend, China will reform with just a little more time and effort. And they don't want to admit they were wrong. Some of them are academics who, uh, like getting invitations to these
Yes.
seminars in China. They like these huge, they like full fare, full tuition paying Chinese students. They like Chinese grants to their study, whatever, their research centers. Lots of the reasons for it are really human nature, of the sort the ancient Greeks would have understood very well. The pride, fear of embarrassment, but money will get you a long ways with Westerners. So they'll generally perform like a seal at a sea park, and when he thinks he's going to get some fish, it works pretty well. But I would note a book written by a fellow named Peter Schweitzer that lays out the success the Chinese have had, really buying America's elite class, and he lays it out. And you'll notice nobody sues him. Um, if he was saying those things about me, I would get my lawyer on the phone if I had one. But that's how bad it is. And you look at Wall Street, for example, and I read the analysis about the China market, and I have been for over 20 years, because I used to work for a bank. And I read it now just to see if anybody ever mentions the idea that investing in China is risky because it has no rule of law. A contract means exactly what Xi Jinping says it means, nothing else. Your assets, your money is subject to being taken at any time. Uh, and it doesn't have markets. These aren't markets in any real sense. They're like rigged casinos at best. Is that a risky thing to get involved in? And you never hear anybody mention it ever. Maybe once in 10 years. I think I've seen maybe in 22 years of reading this stuff, I've seen maybe less than 5 times somebody point out that China is a dangerous place to have your investments. But it shows you what money will do to keep mouths shut in the U.S. and the U.S. business class as well, unfortunately. And they are all in on China, generally speaking. And just recently, like the other day, um, there was a letter that was signed by some top business leaders and some other former prominent officials and China experts in the United States. It was a public letter, widely publicized, saying, "Don't be mean to China. Let the businesses talk to each other and work things out." And wow, I don't use the word quisling loosely or lightly, but my goodness, this is a country which has said that they want to, uh, at best, displace us, and at worst,
Yes.
destroy the capitalist system.
Yes.
And here we are funding them. We have people saying, it's okay to pump money into this country. And keep in mind that the Chinese currency is not convertible, which means nobody outside China really wants the RMB. If they want to buy things overseas, say to build up their military, technology, iron ore, etc., they have to pay in dollars. Where do they get the dollars? Well, people signing those letters are glad to have us keep pumping them into China. And that's something that doesn't get the attention it deserves. So, some days you really kind of despair, it's really depressing as to just how we have gone about building up this country that wants to destroy us. And but at the same time, America still has a good hand to play if we're smart enough to play it.
And at the same time, people who are, let's say, Taiwan hands or against the CCP are portrayed as alt-right or crazy or conspiracy theorists. It's really difficult to deal with it. But I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
a little bit changing
Mhm.
favorably because China kind of shoot it its own foot, I think. So now I think the narrative is changing a little bit.
No, I think you're right. There has been a change, but it takes, it's like turning a big ocean liner, that it
Yes.
doesn't turn quickly. But it has changed. And I'm told actually by a friend who works in this area, he says that in the business world, the small and medium sized companies are much quicker to recognize the problem now. And he says a lot of them are leaving or about to leave China. He says they finally understand the problem, and are looking to save themselves. The bigger companies, not so much. But also, it's in Capitol Hill in Washington, there is, I think, more of a recognition than there's ever been of the China threat, that it is a risk. But I say getting that to translate into concrete actions is taking some time. But there is movement, but a good example of the problem is that just recently a bill has been proposed that would require American investment into China to be screened for national security concerns. This has been just fiercely opposed by the US-China Business Council, the business class. Wall Street isn't happy about it either, but you're seeing the opposition to these very commonsensical efforts to protect American and I'd say free world interests.